In the small, quiet town of Meadow Ridge, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields, lived a man who had seen more of the world than most people could imagine. His name was Jack Steele, and though he looked like any other neighbor wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, he carried secrets that would make your jaw drop. Jack wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a retired Delta Force commander. For decades, he'd been sent to the most dangerous corners of the globe, handling missions so classified they didn't even exist on paper. But now, after years of dodging bullets and outsmarting enemies, Jack wanted nothing more than peace. He bought himself a modest house at the end of a cul-de-sac where life moved slower. There were no explosions here, no midnight raids, no adrenaline-pumping escapes. Just birds chirping, kids playing outside, and neighbors waving hello as they mowed their lawns. It was exactly what Jack needed, or so he thought. He spent his days fishing by the lake, tending to his vegetable garden, and mentoring troubled teens through a local veterans program. Life seemed perfect, almost too good to be true. But trouble has a way of finding people, no matter how hard they try to avoid it. And for Jack, trouble came knocking in the form of the Homeowners Association, or HOA, as everyone called it. The HOA was supposed to keep the neighborhood looking nice, a group of well-meaning folks making sure nobody painted their house neon green or parked broken-down cars in their driveway. At first, Jack didn't think much of them. They sent him friendly reminders about trimming his hedges and keeping his mailbox upright. He followed their rules without complaint because, honestly, it wasn't worth arguing over. Then came the flagpole. Jack had installed a tall flagpole in his front yard, proudly flying the American flag. To him, it wasn't just a decoration. It was a symbol of everything he stood for, everything he'd fought for during his time in uniform. Every morning, he raised the flag with care, saluting it before heading inside to start his day. It made him feel connected to the country, loved, and the sacrifices he'd made. But apparently, not everyone shared his sentiment. One afternoon, a letter arrived in Jack's mailbox. It was from the HOA, written in formal language that somehow managed to sound both polite and threatening at the same time. According to the letter, the flagpole violated some obscure rule about visual aesthetics and had to come down immediately. If Jack refused, there would be consequences, fines, legal action, maybe even forced removal. At first, Jack laughed it off. Surely, they couldn't be serious. This was America, after all, the land of the free. Flying the national flag should be encouraged, not banned. So, he ignored the letter, thinking it would blow over. But it didn't. A week later, another notice appeared under his door, this one sharper in tone. Then came anonymous notes slipped into his mailbox late at night. "Take it down," they read. Or else. Jack started noticing strange things happening around his property. One morning, he found all 4 of his car tires slashed. Another time, someone spray-painted graffiti across his garage door, ugly words meant to intimidate him. Dead animals began showing up on his porch, left there like twisted trophies. Each incident gnawed at him, not because he was scared, but because it felt wrong. How could something as simple as a flagpole cause such hatred? Still, Jack held his ground. He wasn't going to back down, not to bullies hiding behind bureaucracy. Deep down, though, he knew this wasn't really about the flagpole. It was about control, power, and fear. Whoever was behind these attacks wanted to see if he'd cave, if he'd let them push him around. What they didn't realize was that they were dealing with someone who thrived in chaos. Someone who had faced far worse than petty threats. As the tension grew, Jack couldn't help but wonder, who was pulling the strings? Was it the HOA president, a stern woman who always wore pearls and gave long speeches at community meetings? Or was there someone else lurking in the shadows, using the HOA as a front for something darker? Whatever the truth was, Jack knew one thing for certain: it wasn't going to stop unless he put an end to it himself. So, while the rest of Meadow Ridge slept peacefully, unaware of the brewing storm, Jack sat in his living room, staring at the flag swaying gently in the breeze. He clenched his fists, resolve hardening in his chest. This wasn't just about a piece of metal sticking out of his lawn anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant standing alone. And Jack Steele wasn't the kind of man to back down from a fight, not then, not ever. The harassment didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Jack Steele wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let people push him around, but he also wasn't reckless. He knew how to pick his battles, and this one was far from over. Every night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood settled into its usual quiet hum, Jack would sit by his window, watching and waiting. Something about the situation felt off, like there was more to it than just a bunch of uptight neighbors. Upset about a flagpole. The slashed tires, the graffiti, the dead animals, it all seemed too calculated, too personal. Someone wanted to send a message, and Jack was determined to figure out who. One evening, as he sipped his coffee and flipped through an old military manual he'd been rereading, the sound of engines broke the silence. Not car engines, these were louder, deeper, rumbling like thunder rolling across the sky. Jack put down his mug and moved closer to the window. Through the blinds, he saw 3 motorcycles pull into his driveway. The riders dismounted, their leather jackets glinting under the streetlights. They looked tough, with tattoos snaking up their arms and scowls etched onto their faces. One of them, a hulking brute with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. He introduced himself as Razor, though it wasn't hard to guess why he went by that name. His voice was low and gravelly, carrying a tone that left no room for negotiation. "We've been sent to have a little chat," Razor said, crossing his arms over his chest. "About your flagpole." Jack opened the door slowly, standing tall. In the doorway, even without saying a word, his presence commanded respect or maybe fear. He was older than these guys, sure, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness that hinted at years of experience they couldn't begin to understand. Jack nodded politely, inviting them to speak their piece. Razor wasted no time laying out the ultimatum. "You've got 48 hours to take that thing down," he growled, pointing toward the flagpole. "If you don't, we'll come back. And trust me, you won't like what happens next." Jack listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When Razor finished, Jack simply nodded again. "I hear you," he said calmly. "Thanks for stopping by." Then he shut the door, leaving the bikers standing there, unsure of what to make of him. Inside, Jack's mind was already working. Whoever had sent these men clearly underestimated him. Maybe they thought he'd cave under pressure, like so many others probably had. But Jack wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired Delta Force commander, a man who had trained for years to handle situations exactly like this. These bikers might have looked intimidating to the average person, but to Jack, they were amateurs playing dress-up. That night, Jack got to work. He started by securing his property, turning it into a fortress of sorts. He checked every window and door, making sure they were locked tight. In the basement, he dug out an old toolbox filled with gadgets and gear he hadn't touched in years. Among the items were motion-activated floodlights, which he installed along the perimeter of his yard. He also set up tripwires near the driveway, rigging them to release harmless but disorienting smoke bombs. It wasn't lethal, but it would be enough to throw anyone off balance. As he worked, memories flooded back, memories of nights spent in hostile territories, setting traps and preparing for ambushes. Back then, the stakes had been life and death. Now, It was just a bunch of bikers trying to bully him into submission. Still, Jack approached the task with the same focus and precision he'd always brought to his missions. This wasn't just about protecting his home. It was about sending a message of his own. No one messed with Jack Steele, not anymore. By morning, everything was ready. Jack brewed himself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, the bikers returned, but this time there were more of them. 8 motorcycles roared into his driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The men dismounted, armed with crowbars and baseball bats, their intentions clear. They surrounded the house, pounding on doors and windows. Shouting insults meant to rattle him, but Jack wasn't rattled. As soon as they stepped onto his property, the motion-activated lights flickered on, blinding them instantly. Some of the bikers stumbled backward, shielding their eyes. Others tripped over the hidden wires, triggering the smoke bombs. Thick clouds of white smoke filled the air, making it impossible for them to see or coordinate their attack. Chaos erupted. As the bikers shouted at each other, unsure of what was happening or where to go. Through it all, Jack remained calm. He grabbed his Glock from the kitchen drawer and walked outside, stepping into the chaos like a ghost emerging from the fog. By the time the smoke cleared, only 2 of the bikers were still standing, and both froze when they saw Jack standing there, gun in hand. His voice was steady, commanding. "Leave," he said simply, "and don't come back." The bikers didn't argue. They scrambled to their bikes and sped away, leaving behind their weapons and pride. Jack watched them disappear into the night, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He'd expected trouble, but not quite like this. Whoever had sent these men clearly meant business. And while Jack had handled tonight's threat, he knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back inside, Jack poured himself another cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down notes, details about the bikers, their motorcycles, the way they moved and talked. There was a pattern here, a thread connecting all of this. Someone had gone to great lengths to hire a gang to intimidate him, and Jack was determined to find out who. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd faced down danger before, but tonight reminded him of something important. Even in retirement, he still had what it took to protect what mattered most. As dawn broke over Meadow Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack glanced out the window at the flagpole swaying gently in the breeze. The American flag fluttered proudly, untouched by the chaos of the night. Jack smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about a flagpole anymore. It was about standing up to bullies, no matter who they were, or what they thought they could get away with. And Jack Steele wasn't the kind of man to back down, not now, not ever. The morning after the biker gang's failed attempt to intimidate him, Jack Steele woke up with a clear head and a plan forming in his mind. He wasn't just going to sit around waiting for the next attack. He was done being reactive. This wasn't some war zone overseas. This was his home, his neighborhood, his life. And if someone thought they could push him around, they were about to learn a hard lesson. Jack had always been good at reading people, and last night's encounter told him plenty. The bikers weren't operating alone, they were hired muscle. Pawns in a bigger game. Someone had sent them, someone who thought they could hide behind threats and intimidation. Whoever it was didn't know who they were dealing with. Jack's years in Delta Force hadn't just taught him how to fight. They'd taught him how to think, how to dig deep into the shadows and uncover the truth. Now, it was time to put those skills to work. He started by retracing the events of the past few weeks. The HOA letters, the vandalism, the dead animals. On his porch, all of it pointed back to one thing: control. Someone wanted to control him, to make him bow to their rules, no matter how ridiculous or unjustified. But why go to such lengths over a flagpole? It didn't add up. There had to be more to it. Jack decided to investigate further, starting with the HOA itself. That afternoon, he drove down to the local coffee shop where the board members often held informal meetings. He ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping an ear out for any mention of himself or the flagpole. Sure enough, within minutes, he overheard snippets of conversation that caught his attention. Two women at a nearby table were whispering about that stubborn guy who refused to comply with the HOA's demands. They mentioned fines, legal action, and even hinted at something about teaching him a lesson. Jack made a mental note of their tone and body language. These weren't just concerned neighbors. They sounded almost giddy, like they enjoyed wielding power over others. But what really intrigued Jack was when one of them muttered, "If only we'd known hiring those bikers wouldn't work," before quickly changing the subject. Bingo. So the HOA had hired the gang after all. Jack felt a spark of anger but pushed it aside. Anger wouldn't solve anything right now. What mattered was gathering evidence proof he could use to expose whoever was pulling the strings. Over the next few days, Jack played detective. He visited City Hall under the pretense of wanting to learn more about the HOA's policies, casually, asking questions and flipping through public records. He discovered that the HOA president had a history of shady dealings, including lawsuits filed against former residents who dared to challenge her authority. One document stood out, a financial report showing large sums of money funneled into private accounts linked to the president and a handful of board members. It looked suspiciously like embezzlement. Jack also reached out to a few neighbors he trusted, subtly probing for information without revealing too much. Some admitted they'd been pressured into paying extra fees for minor infractions, like planting flowers in the wrong color scheme or parking their cars in the driveway overnight. Others confessed they'd received similar threats when they tried to speak out against the HOA's strict rules. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The HOA wasn't just a group of nosy neighbors obsessed with aesthetics. It was a corrupt organization using fear and manipulation to maintain its grip on the community. As the pieces fell into place, Jack realized he was dealing with something far bigger than he'd initially thought. This wasn't just about him or his flagpole anymore. It was about protecting the entire neighborhood from abuse. If he didn't act, the HOA would continue bullying people, ruining lives, and lining their own pockets. But taking them down wouldn't be easy. They had resources, connections, and the ability to make trouble disappear. Jack needed a strategy, one that combined stealth, precision, and a little bit of psychological warfare. Late one night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by notes, maps, and printouts of documents he'd collected. He sketched out a plan, step by step. First, he'd gather irrefutable evidence of the HOA's corruption recordings, emails, bank statements, anything that proved their wrongdoing. Then, he'd set a trap, luring the key players into exposing themselves in front of witnesses. Finally, he'd present everything to the authorities, ensuring they had no choice but to take action. The tricky part would be getting close, enough to the HOA leadership without raising suspicion. Jack knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, but not just anyone. He needed someone discreet, trustworthy, and willing to take risks. After some thought, he approached an old friend from his military days who lived nearby. The man, retired, like Jack, had spent decades working in intelligence and surveillance. When Jack explained the situation, his friend didn't hesitate to join the cause. Together, they devised a way to infiltrate the HOA's inner circle. Their first move was simple yet effective. Jack attended the next HOA meeting, playing the role of a compliant homeowner eager to resolve the misunderstanding about his flagpole. He apologized profusely, claiming he'd misunderstood the rules and promised to cooperate moving forward. His performance was convincing enough to lower the board's guard. Over the following weeks, he ingratiated himself with the members, attending social events and volunteering for committees. All the while, he used hidden recording devices to capture incriminating conversations. One evening, during a private gathering at the HOA president's house, Jack struck gold. She let slip details about the embezzlement scheme, boasting about how she'd managed to silence dissenters and keep the neighborhood in line. Another board member chimed in, admitting they'd orchestrated the vandalism and hired the biker gang to scare Jack into submission. Every word was captured on tape. With the evidence in hand, Jack prepared for the final phase of his plan. He arranged a secret meeting between the HOA president and the leader of the biker gang, knowing full well neither party would resist the opportunity to discuss payment and future plans. Using his contacts, Jack ensured the meeting took place in a location equipped with cameras and microphones. As the two conspirators spoke freely, unaware they were being recorded, Jack watched from a safe distance, satisfaction washing over him. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Jack had everything he needed to bring the HOA down. The recordings, combined with the financial records and witness testimonies, painted a damning picture of corruption and abuse. He handed the evidence over to a journalist friend who specialized in investigative reporting, knowing the story would explode once it hit the news. Sitting on his porch later that day, Jack sipped his coffee and watched as kids rode their bikes down the street. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace, not because the battle was over, but because he'd fought it the right way. He hadn't stooped to their level. He'd used brains over brawn, patience over aggression. And in doing so, he'd reminded himself and everyone else that standing up for what's right isn't just about winning. It's about making sure justice prevails, no matter how long it takes. As the flag fluttered proudly above his yard, Jack smiled. This wasn't the end of the road, it was just the beginning. The evidence was rock solid, and Jack Steele knew it. He'd spent weeks gathering every scrap of proof he could find: recordings of secret meetings, financial documents showing illegal transactions, and even witness testimonies from neighbors who had finally decided to speak up. Now, sitting at his kitchen table with stacks of papers spread out in front of him, Jack felt a mix of emotions: satisfaction, anger, and a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about clearing his name or taking down the HOA, it was about protecting an entire community from people who thought they were above the law. But exposing corruption wasn't as simple as walking into a police station and handing over a folder. Jack had seen enough in his life to know that powerful people often had ways of covering their tracks, especially when those tracks led straight to them. The HOA president and her cronies weren't just ordinary bullies, they were connected. They had friends in high places, including local politicians and business owners who benefited from their schemes. If Jack wanted to make sure justice was served, he needed to play this carefully. His first step was to reach out to someone he trusted, a journalist named Linda, who specialized in investigative reporting. Linda had covered stories on government, corruption, and corporate scandals for years, and she had a reputation for being relentless. When Jack called her, explaining what he'd uncovered, she didn't hesitate to jump on board. "This is big," she said after hearing him out. "If we can prove everything you're saying, it'll blow the lid off this town." Together, they went through the evidence piece by piece, organizing it into a timeline that showed exactly how the HOA had operated. There were emails detailing bribes paid to city officials, receipts for expensive vacations funded by embezzled money, and audio clips of board members laughing about how easily they intimidated residents. It was all there, laid out like a puzzle, each piece connecting to form a damning picture. Linda suggested they take the story public once they had everything ready. But Jack insisted on one more thing, confronting the HOA directly. "We need to give them a chance to admit what they've done," he told her. "It's not about revenge, it's about accountability. Let's see if they'll own up to it before we go nuclear." So Jack devised a plan. Using his connections, he arranged a secret meeting between the HOA president and the leader of the biker gang, the same man who had shown up at his house weeks earlier. Jack made sure the location was wired with cameras and microphones, capturing every word spoken during the encounter. He knew both parties would be eager to discuss payment and future plans, unaware they were walking into a trap. On the day of the meeting, Jack stayed hidden nearby, watching through binoculars as the two figures entered the dimly lit warehouse where the rendezvous was set to take place. Inside, the conversation quickly turned heated. The HOA president accused the biker gang of failing to scare Jack into submission, while the gang leader demanded more money for their services. Both sides lashed out, revealing details about their operation that left no room for doubt about their guilt. As the argument escalated, Jack listened intently, making sure every word was recorded. By the time the meeting ended, he had hours of footage proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the HOA had orchestrated the harassment campaign against him and likely many others in the neighborhood. With this final piece of evidence secured, Jack handed everything over to Linda, confident that the truth would soon come to light. The next morning, the story broke. Linda published a detailed expose online, complete against backdrop widespread outrage erupted Meadow Ridge. Neighbors, who had been too afraid to speak out, suddenly found their voices, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and extortion. Social media lit up with posts calling for justice, and local news stations picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Within hours, the HOA president and several board members were under investigation, their reputations in tatters. For Jack, though, the victory was bittersweet. While he was glad the truth was finally out, he couldn't help but feel frustrated that it had taken so much effort to expose something that should have been obvious all along. Corruption thrived because good people stayed silent, too scared or apathetic to stand up and fight. But Jack also knew that change started small, with one person deciding to say enough and refusing to back down, no matter how hard things got. As the dust settled, Jack began to notice subtle shifts in the neighborhood. People smiled more, waved hello without hesitation, and seemed genuinely relieved to have the weight of fear lifted off their shoulders. Some even approached Jack personally, thanking him for standing up to the HOA when no one else would. One elderly woman teared up as she told him how she'd been forced to pay exorbitant fines for minor infractions, leaving her struggling to make ends meet. "You've given us our community back," she said, gripping his hand tightly. Jack nodded, humbled by her words. He hadn't done this for recognition or praise. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. Still, hearing how much it meant to others reminded him why he'd chosen to stay in Meadow Ridge in the first place. Despite its flaws, this place had become home. And now, thanks to his actions, it had a chance to heal and rebuild. Not long after the scandal broke, the authorities arrested the HOA president and several key board members, charging them with multiple felonies ranging from embezzlement to conspiracy. Their trial dominated headlines for months, serving as a stark reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. Meanwhile, the remaining board members resigned in disgrace, leaving the HOA in shambles. With the organization effectively dismantled, the residents of Meadow Ridge came together to figure out what came next. A series of town hall meetings were held, where neighbors openly discussed how to create a fairer, more transparent system for managing the community. Jack attended every meeting, offering advice based on his military background in leadership and strategy. His calm demeanor and practical solutions earned him respect, and soon people began encouraging him to run for the newly reformed HOA board. At first, Jack resisted. He hadn't moved to Meadow Ridge to get involved in politics. He'd come here for peace and quiet. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he had a unique opportunity to make a difference. Running for the board wasn't about wielding power, it was about ensuring that no one else had to endure what he and so many others had gone through. It was about building trust, fostering unity, and creating a neighborhood where everyone felt safe and valued. In the end, Jack decided to throw his hat into the ring. His campaign was simple: transparency, accountability, and fairness. He didn't promise grand changes or flashy initiatives, he promised honesty, and that resonated with the community. On election night, Jack won by a landslide, earning the overwhelming support of his neighbors. Standing on his porch later that evening, Jack looked out at the street bathed in golden sunset light. Kids chased each other across lawns, laughter filling the air. Across the way, a couple sat on their front steps, sipping lemonade and chatting with a neighbor. It was a scene of normalcy, of connection, of hope. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt truly at peace. He glanced up at the flagpole in his yard, the American flag fluttering proudly in the breeze. It had started as a symbol of defiance, a reminder of everything he'd fought for, but now it represented something different. It stood for resilience, for standing up to bullies, and for the belief that even in the face of darkness, good could prevail. Jack smiled softly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The quiet life he'd sought wasn't so quiet anymore, but maybe that was okay. After all, sometimes heroes are needed closer to home. The victory against the corrupt HOA was sweet, but Jack Steele knew it wasn't the end of the road. Winning elections and dismantling a toxic organization didn't magically fix everything overnight. The scars ran deep in Meadow Ridge years of fear, intimidation, and mistrust don't just vanish because someone new is in charge. But Jack wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let things slide. He'd taken on bikers, uncovered corruption, and stood up to bullies not to bask in glory, but to make lasting change. And now, as the newly elected leader of the reformed HOA, he had his work cut out for him. Jack's first order of business was simple: transparency. One of the biggest issues with the old HOA was that decisions were made behind closed doors, leaving residents in the dark about how their money was being spent or why certain rules existed. So, Jack introduced weekly updates posted online where anyone could see exactly what was happening. Budgets, meeting minutes, upcoming projects, all of it was laid bare for the community to review. At first, some neighbors were skeptical. "Is this real?" one older man asked during a town hall meeting. "Or are we just getting another version of the same thing?" Jack smiled patiently. "It's real," he said firmly. "If you ever feel like I'm hiding something, come knock on my door. I'll show you myself." That openness earned him trust, little by little. People began showing up to meetings not to complain, but to participate. They offered ideas, volunteered for committees, and started taking ownership of their neighborhood again. It was slow progress, but Jack didn't mind. Change wasn't supposed to happen overnight. It took time, effort, and patience. One of the biggest challenges was rebuilding relationships within the community. Years of bullying and manipulation had left many residents wary of each other. Neighbors who once shared coffee over fences now avoided eye contact. To tackle this, Jack organized small gatherings, a block party here, a cleanup day there. Nothing fancy, just opportunities for people to reconnect. During one such event, a young mother approached Jack, her voice trembling as she thanked him for giving her family a second chance at feeling safe. Her son, she explained, used to love playing outside but stopped after a series of threatening letters from the HOA accused them of letting their grass grow too long. Now he's back out there with his friends, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you for bringing our neighborhood back. Moments like these reminded Jack why he'd fought so hard. This wasn't just about rules or property. Values, it was about people. About creating a place where everyone felt welcome, respected, and valued. And while he couldn't undo the past, he could help shape a better future. But running the HOA wasn't without its headaches. There were still holdouts, people who resisted change or clung to the old ways of doing things. Some even accused Jack of being too soft, claiming stricter rules were necessary to maintain order. You can't please everyone, Linda, the journalist who helped expose the scandal, told him one evening over coffee. All you can do is stay true to your principles. Jack nodded, knowing she was right. He couldn't force everyone to agree with him, nor did he want to. What mattered was that the majority of the community supported the direction they were heading in. Slowly but surely, Meadow Ridge was transforming into a place where kindness outweighed control, where collaboration replaced coercion. As months passed, Jack found himself reflecting more on his own journey. When he first moved to Meadow Ridge, he'd been looking for peace, a quiet retirement after decades of chaos. Instead, he'd stepped into a different kind of battlefield, one fought not with guns, but with integrity and perseverance. In many ways, this fight had been harder than any mission he'd faced overseas. There were no clear enemies, no defined objectives, just gray areas and complicated emotions. Yet somehow it felt more rewarding. Late one evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jack noticed something he hadn't seen in a long time. Laughter echoing through the streets. Kids raced around with flashlights, playing tag under the stars. Parents chatted on porches, sharing stories and jokes. Even the elderly couple across the street, who rarely ventured outside before, was sitting on their swing, smiling as they watched the commotion. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, and Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought about all the battles he'd fought, both literal and figurative, and how they had led him here. From war zones to flagpoles, every step of his life had prepared him for this moment. Not to lead armies or command missions, but to lead a community. To remind people that standing together was stronger than standing alone. That justice wasn't just a concept reserved for courts and headlines. It lived in everyday actions. In choosing right over easy. The next morning, Jack woke up early as usual. He brewed a pot of coffee and stepped outside, breathing in the crisp autumn air. As he raised the American flag on his pole, he paused for a moment, saluting it like he always did. But this time, the gesture carried extra weight. The flag wasn't just a symbol of his past service. It represented hope for the future, for unity, resilience, and the belief that even in the face of darkness, good could prevail. Later that day, he attended another town hall meeting. The room buzzed with energy as residents discussed plans for a community garden, a playground renovation, and a holiday lights contest. Ideas flowed freely, and disagreements were handled respectfully. Jack listened intently, offering guidance when needed, but mostly letting others take the lead. After years of having their voices silenced, it was important for people to feel empowered to speak up. As the meeting wrapped up, a young boy tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Are you really a soldier?" he asked, wide-eyed. Jack chuckled, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "I was," he replied. "A long time ago. Did you fight bad guys?" "I did," Jack said with a nod. "But sometimes the hardest Fights aren't against bad guys, they're about protecting the people you care about. The boy frowned, trying to process this. Like our neighborhood? Exactly like our neighborhood, Jack said, ruffling the boy's hair. And guess what? You can be a hero too. All it takes is standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The boy grinned, proud of the idea, and scampered off to tell his friends. Jack watched him go, a small smile playing on his lips. Maybe that was the real lesson in all of this, not just for the boy, but for everyone. Heroes weren't born, they were made. Through courage, determination, and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. That night, as Jack settled into his favorite chair with a book, he felt a sense of contentment wash over him. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but that was okay. Life never promised perfection, it only offered moments worth fighting for. And in Meadow Ridge, those moments were everywhere. From the laughter of children to the camaraderie of neighbors working side by side, this place had become something special, something worth protecting. Outside, the flag fluttered gently in the breeze, a silent testament to the power of standing firm. Jack leaned back, closing his eyes, and allowed himself a rare moment of rest. The battle was far from over, but for now, the quiet life he'd sought had finally found him.